Hi, I'm Aerin Jacob. I'm an ecologist at the University of Victoria. It is a long drive from Montreal to Vancouver Island. 5,000 kilometers to think about why I was so excited to move back to the West Coast. My friends, my family, and a new job, yeah. But I was also really excited to live by the ocean again. Like Newfoundland, coastal British Columbia is beautiful. There's tall mountains that sweep right down to the sea. There's forested islands that dot the landscape. And there's craggy cliffs that are way more than just 50 shades of gray. Sure, it rains a lot, but that collision of the fresh water and the salt water is one of the reasons that the BC coast is so full of life. One of my first weekends back, I was going kayaking with some friends. And packing up for a trip like that is always fun. I've got the tents. Aerin, don't forget the map this time. And most important, what kind of whiskey goes best with oysters? Oysters. This wasn't just a kayaking trip. This was an oyster kayaking trip. And I was really excited to be collecting wild seafood again. It's one of the things I love most about being outside. It makes me feel connected to the place that I live. It reminds me of deep relationships that all people have with nature. It's one of the reasons I care about conservation. So we were all packed up. We set off in our kayaks. We're paddling along. We come to a likely-looking oyster beach. So we get out. We're wading through the cool, cold, clear water, looking for oysters, laughing as our feet squelch in the mud rudely. There's an oyster. It's not too big. It's not too small. It doesn't take us very long to fill up our small bucket. Later, we arrive at our campsite, and as we get out and walk on the beach, there's the crunch, crunch, crunch of shells underfoot. There's millions and millions of white shells. They stretch hundreds of meters on either side of us. This beach, like so many in coastal BC, is literally made of shells. We're standing on what's called a midden. And a midden is proof that people have lived and eaten shellfish here for thousands and thousands of years. There's a saying amongst Coast Salish First Nations: when the tide goes out, the table is set. First Nations people have not only harvested and eaten shellfish, clams, gooey ducks, oysters, chitons, whelks, and more for thousands of years, they've also cultivated them. They've physically altered beaches, huge amount of work up and down the coast, to make them more productive. So it felt pretty special for me to be standing on that beach, actually that beach right behind me, eating oysters. So I pick up one of the oysters, I cut out my shucking knife, and I slide it in, I cut the adductor muscle, I pry it open, I squeeze some lemon on top, and I knock it back with a slurp. It's briny. It's stronger than the ones that you get on ice in a restaurant. It's more seaweedy. And I'm feeling kind of poetic. I look around at my friends and I say, "Oh, Pacific oyster, delicious fruit of the sea. I'm so happy to be here and to be eating thee." And my happy little bubble is burst when my friend says, "Well, you better enjoy it while you can, because the oceans are acidifying and all the shellfish are dissolving." Great. So there's an awkward pause in the conversation. We all stare at the firelight for a minute, thinking, ocean acidification. It's sometimes called the evil twin of climate change, but not a lot of people know about it. And here's how it works. We are pumping more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and a quarter of that is being absorbed by the ocean. That's actually changing ocean chemistry. It's lowering the pH of seawater. And actually, since the Industrial Revolution 200 years ago, seawater's become a third more acidic. So, okay, what does that have to do with the shellfish? Well, it's kind of like osteoporosis, the condition that makes our bones brittle. It means that when the water is more acidic, it's harder for shellfish to make their shells. Their shells become more brittle, they break more easily, animals grow more slowly, and they even die. So all that's pretty sad for the shellfish, but does it really matter? Well, actually, yeah, it does. Shellfish, not only do millions of people around the world depend on shellfish for food and income, shellfish do a whole bunch of other things. They trap sediments and they create these coastal buffers that protect us from things like storm surges and waves. They filter water and excess nutrients, which helps keep our coastal ecosystems clean. They create nursery habitat for many fish species and invertebrates, and they're really important parts of cultural heritage and identity for coastal people. So that's all kind of sad if we lose the shellfish. But wait, there is some good news. Anything that we do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will help to reduce ocean acidification. We're already starting. We've got to do a lot more, so we've got to pull in and do that. And then there's also the kind of research that my collaborators and I do. We work with industries, coastal communities, and governments, particularly First Nations, to identify how ocean acidification will affect shellfish. And we're looking for places that shellfish will be resilient to ocean acidification, places that people might be able to farm, places that we might restore habitat to help wild populations. And how does that affect other things that people want to use the oceans for, like ecotourism, species at risk? But before you think that this is a question of scientists running into the rescue, it's more complicated than that. We benefit hugely by these kind of collaborations. Not only does our science improve by including the ideas and perspectives and knowledge of other people, it also means that our research is likely to get out in the real world, actually make a difference beyond dusty, boring scientific reports. So we're working to actually implement marine spatial plans, which means that people, wildlife will be improved in the future. We'll be able to have sustainable development that is economically profitable and reduces the environmental impact. And I keep this photo above my desk at work, and it reminds me of the people, the wildlife, and places on the BC coast. It reminds me why I love this work. It reminds me of what we're trying to do. We're trying to ensure that as the tide goes out, this table will be set for generations to come. Thank you.